Hello everyone, welcome to the live feeding of the anemones at the Puget Sound Estuarium. Sorry for the delay, had a bit of technological issues. That fish that just appeared on screen is our new fish. It's a rockfish. This specific rockfish, due to its copper coloring, is called the copper rockfish. Sadly, I will not be feeding the rockfish today. I'll be feeding the anemones and the sea star that we have in this tank. So today I'll be feeding our anemones and our sea star. I'll be feeding them some shrimp that we bought from like a regular grocery store, thawed it, cut it into pieces, and gonna feed them out. So we've got multiple anemones here today. The bright green ones are our green surf anemones. That green color you see is actually due to an algae that lives inside of the anemone. So while this anemone eats food, it also can get energy from the photosynthetic algae that lives within it. So these anemones are fish-eating anemones, which means that they are carnivorous. They love to eat fish. I'm feeding them some shrimp today. That anemone doesn't seem too interested in the shrimp, unlike the other one, which ate it quickly. They bring it to the center of their mouth, which is that center of all those tentacles. That other anemone that I just fed, that's our painted anemone. It's got that very beautiful red and green on the side of it. It's got a lot stubbier tentacles than these green sea anemones, which have pretty long, thin ones. That small anemone in the middle is what I'm going to feed next. That anemone is our aggregating anemone. And what's really cool about that one is that when it reproduces, when it wants to create more of itself, it just can. It can split into 2 anemones, and then those 2 anemones can split into 4 anemones. And so instead of having to deal with a female and a male, this anemone can just populate an entire area by cloning itself and splitting into 2. It looks like that big green surf anemone wasn't too interested in the shrimp that I gave it. it will bring the shrimp to the center of all those tentacles. That's where its mouth is. It is actually the only hole that sea anemones have. So what goes in that hole also must come out that hole. Now we're gonna move on to some other sea anemones that we have in this tank. Here we have our sand anemone. The sand anemone likes to bury itself mostly under the sand so that only those top tentacles you'll see. And so it kind of looks like a flower. So this is our rose sand anemone. That one looked very hungry. It brought the shrimp very quickly to the center of where all those tentacles are. And that's where its mouth is. Sea anemones will use stinging cells called stinging nematocysts. And they use those stinging cells. They're kind of like little barbs. They shoot little hooks into the shrimp, into the fish, to paralyze it, so that it can consume the fish or shrimp without that fish or shrimp destroying the sea anemone. If it tried to eat a live fish, that fish could thrash and tear the anemone apart. So it's got to have those stinging cells to paralyze the fish to consume it. One of the last anemones I'm going to be feeding today is another painted anemone. This painted anemone sadly is not as pretty as the other one, but it is indeed a painted sea anemone. This is just a tan coloration of one. And that copper rockfish is getting in my way. So you see how it pulls onto that? It pulls it into its mouth. So if you ever see a sea anemone out in the wild and you want to pet it, make sure to use one finger gently. And if it's sticky, that's because it's trying to sting you. It's trying to paralyze you. But thankfully, our skin is so thick that we do just fine. It's just a little sticky. We don't become paralyzed. But because fish and shrimp have thinner skin, they're actually able to be paralyzed by the sea anemones. But try not to harass sea anemones. Try not to stick your whole hand on them, because those stinging cells are a one-time use. So once they sting, they have to regrow a new stinging cell to fire again to catch their prey. And so if you touch your hand all over the anemones, then they won't be able to eat anymore, because they won't have the ability to sting their prey. So one of the last animals I'm going to feed in this tank is our big pink sea star. Let's try and get a better view of it. There we go. Much better. So there is our big pink sea star. It's reaching up to the surface. It probably smells all the shrimp that I put in this tank. The sea star can actually taste the water. On each of those 5 arms, it has thousands of feet. And those feet are called tube feet because they look like little tubes. And they can use those tube feet to smell or taste the water to find their prey. And while a lot of people think sea stars are algae eaters, they're actually carnivores. They love meat. They love to eat mussels, clams, shrimp. Sometimes we'll feed them clams, but today I'm gonna feed this one a piece of shrimp, just like I fed all the anemones. So I've got a piece of shrimp that I thawed out, just like the kind you'd buy from the grocery store. Our sea stars love to eat healthy, love that fresh grade shrimp. And you can see it smelling the water with those feet, the tube feet. Seeing if that shrimp is tasty. Well, this may look like an ochre or purple sea star. It's a different species of sea star than you may have usually seen on our live feedings. This one is our big pink sea star. They're usually found a bit deeper down than the purple and the orange ochre sea stars. And so if you're out tide pooling, you probably won't see these ones too often on the beach. If you do see a smaller pink sea star, that could be a version of the ochre sea stars, as that purple or ochre sea star comes in a variety of colors from purple, orange, sometimes even pink. So sea stars don't have blood, so when we move our muscles, we're pumping blood throughout our body. That's what our heart is doing. It's helping pump that blood. Sea stars don't have any blood, so how do you think that they move? How are they moving if they don't have blood circulating through them? Would you believe me if I told you it was water? They can take water into their bodies, direct it, and then they can use the water inside their bodies to power their muscles. Do you not find that very tasty? When a sea star usually is hunting for food, they're looking for clams or mussels, and they'll crawl on top of a clam or a mussel. They'll use those tube feet and their arms to help pry open the mussel and clam just enough to take their stomach out of their body into the clam, digest the clam, and put their stomach back in their body. Sadly, this sea star is pressed against that back wall, so we're not going to get to see its stomach exposed out of its body when it's digesting that shrimp. So it's slowly moving that piece of shrimp down to the center of its body on the underside where its mouth is. Let's feed that sand rose anemone again. It looked like it ate that pretty quickly. Give it a small piece to show you how they sting. They use those stinging cells to grip onto the food and try and pull it into the center. You can see it sticking and when you pull it into the center. Lost the shrimp. It can be quite a challenge to feed sea stars. You have to have quite some patience to wait for it to grip onto the food. In some of our other tanks, we have some fish that like to eat the sea star's food. We look back at the sea stars we fed at the beginning, that small aggregating anemone at the bottom of the green serpent anemone. That one, the aggregating anemone, is still digesting its food, still closed up. The green serpent anemones have opened back up. They're 1 in seconds. Sadly, I do not have seconds for them. We don't want to overfeed our animals so that they don't produce a lot of waste and cloudy up their tank. We want them to be healthy, eating a balanced diet. I hope you enjoyed the live feeding of our sea anemones. If you missed the beginning, don't worry, we'll post the video afterwards so you can re-watch it all over again and watch as each anemone gets fed a piece of shrimp. Because these are the fish-eating anemones, they're carnivores, not like the plumose anemones, which eat small phytoplankton as well as zooplankton, so they're more of an omnivore. These anemones don't care much for plants, and while they may look like a plant, they are actually an animal. That green sea anemone, though, is very special. The green serpent anemones have that algae inside of them that allows them to be both photosynthetic as well as a carnivore eating fish. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook so that you get notified of when these live feedings are. We should have them scheduled every third Saturday or so. So keep an eye out for those. Make sure to also follow us on YouTube so that you get notified when we have new Tiny Tides videos or live feedings. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for joining me.